In talking about aphasia, we've got some incredible experts to draw on in Joanne Lasker and Kathy Garrett and Julia King-Fisher. If you remember, we looked at the categories of communicator checklist as an important tool for assessing where individuals with aphasia are and for helping to guide your intervention moving forward. And I will talk about each of these distinctions again, but just wanted to remind you that on a very basic level, we talk about people who are partner dependent, meaning they're still reliant on others for either quite a bit or some of the messages that they need, the choices that they need, the vocabulary that's given to them, or the reminders to use a system, versus people who are relatively independent. That is not to say that they don't need any assistance, but the assistance may be given offline, and then when they enter into communication situations, they're fairly independent in doing so with either stored messages or messages that they come up with themselves, or they do well okay, but it's just certain specific situations where they require additional help. So again, remember, going to this categories of communicator checklist is really important, a way that you can move through, make decisions about what are the skills the person has, and then what's still challenging for them. All right. Another way to think about working with people with aphasia is to ask yourself 5 basic assessment questions. Can the person use unaided strategies to communicate? Because this is going to be really big, and what you're going to find for individuals with aphasia is that they may have a strong preference toward using unaided modes, and you've got to consider that and slot in the times where you can just say, hey, we're only going to use this high-tech system because it's going to meet all your needs. No, you got to say, what are the strategies that they're using? Remember, unaided includes speech. So what access do they have to speech, and what's it like? And what other kinds of gestures do they use? So be thinking about that unaided forms of communication, what they currently use and what they might potentially use. Do they use partner-dependent strategies to communicate? Meaning, when you watch these individuals, do they have a person who's there with them, who's helping them? Remember when this happened? Or I think you mean this. Or the person's giving them choices. To what extent do they lean on a partner to help them? And to what extent are those strategies actually really helpful? Because you want to know that. Do they use external or stored information or messages? So are they already showing you examples of things that have been written, things that come in, things they've done before, photographs? Are they already doing these kind of things when they come in? Can they access stored messages on a device in a communication task? The chapter for Tim in your casebook talks about dynamic assessment and how important that is. So how quickly could somebody, given a communication device, learn, oh yeah, I see how this works. Here's a message. I can get to it. Yes, I can use that. And to what extent do they require a lot of prompting to do so? Or are they already using something when you see them? And that's a different level. But a lot of times this is going to be a dynamic consideration. And then can they formulate or generate new messages with the device? And again, as part of your assessment, can you figure out if they had access to prediction? Would that be helpful for them? Can they use typing? To what extent? How can it supplement things that they've done with speech? Can they generate new messages with the device to communicate? And this is going to help you to narrow in on that type of communicator that you're working with. The needs assessment for people with aphasia, we've got another great resource here. And a lot of it is the bottom line of what would you like to be doing that you're not currently doing, and thinking about things about what did you used to do that you'd like to be able to do again. So when you look at the aphasia needs assessment here that's been made available, we also see right away some number scales. How are things going? And these are really helpful to get a sense of where is a person, how is it going in general, how well are you communicating. We're trying to narrow in on situations that are problematic. We want to find out what the topics are that you really want to talk about. And when we look at aphasia pages later, we'll be able to go and match some things from your needs assessment to the aphasia pages and say, well, those are the things we really want to locate on the device and be sure we got access to. What's really hard for you? And you may need to give examples as the person is completing this sheet, but finding out what's still really hard. Finding out the degree to which a person is partner dependent or independent here. And then who are their partners? And then are there skills your partner needs to have that would be facilitative for you? We talked before about how do you go from partner to facilitator? How do you become somebody who's really actively assisting in making communication happen? Looking at the strategies that you're already using, you can talk about reading and materials that you would like to be able to read again, and things related to writing. So by going through and getting the aphasia needs assessment, by really thinking through questions related to unaided and aided strategies, and then carefully considering where somebody falls on your category of communicator checklist, you can go really far in doing your AAC assessment. And you can supplement that with a lot of great aphasia diagnostic tools that are out there to help it understand the extent of a language impairment for somebody. Okay, so that's our needs assessment. When we think about partner-supported strategies, these are the things that we may cue the partner to use to become more of that facilitator, the person who's going to help. And I want to talk about strategies related to augmented input, written choices in conversation, and tagged yes/no questions. For augmented input, this is where the partner's going to supplement their spoken language with gestures, written keywords, drawings, or diagrams. Let me give you an example. So let's say, to start out, I talk with this person. I say, hey, so I hear you meet a lot of people at Silver Sneakers and Panera, and the person with aphasia looks very confused. Oh, sorry, I'm going too fast. I hear you meet people, and I'll write it, and then also draw people at Silver Sneakers, and I'll draw my own Silver Sneakers, and Panera. And I'm able to just write this out. It slows me down as a partner and gives them some things to look at and consider. And what you may find too is that the person with aphasia can now use this that you've given them to point and say, yes, Silver Sneakers, yes, people, yes, Panera, and people. And now you've given that person access to some basic AAC strategies that they can use. So in addition to helping the person understand, you've now created a space where you can have some basic conversations. So augmented inputs a really great strategy to be able to use. So for this demonstration, I'm going to be talking about the Aphasia Page Set on Tobii Dynavox devices and Snap Core. Now Snap Core, here is your core word page set that you maybe are familiar with, but Core Words also has a aphasia page set. And remember, you can get to different page sets here, so I'm going to move over and I'm going to get to my settings, and I'm going to go down to page set. There, page set. And now we need to get to a different page set. I'm currently on Core first. I need to get to my aphasia page set, so I'll do that. And I will make that my new set, and so I can see that here with my check mark. And so now we can get out of here, and I'll be done making my changes. And now I'm in the aphasia page set, and for this I see that I've already got a whiteboard, and the whiteboard is a great chance for me to try out some of these ideas. So I've got a pen here, and so just in the example I had, I can say, hey, I hear you like to meet people. And then I can continue talking. And soon I'll say it's going to be your turn to say something next. So I look for the keywords based on things that I'm saying. I can save some of my information. I can also add images to it. I might take a photo or take one from my existing photos, take one using the camera, and be able to add it onto here. And that might be really helpful. And that whiteboard's still going to be available to me. And if I really want to keep it, I'll just make a new whiteboard, and then later on I can come back to this whiteboard that I had previously. Maybe there's something really valuable in there that you want to use. So we're going to keep coming back to our aphasia page set, but for now let's return to our written choice strategy. So in a written choice strategy, I'm going to continue writing down things I say, and I can also draw, but this time I'm going to give a couple of choices. So they could be things we might choose to talk about. They could be a graphic scale to try to get some impressions about what does somebody think about this. Let me give you an example. So you were living with someone in Pittsburgh. Person nods. Who were you living with? You don't get much, or you know the person doesn't have a great way to tell you. You can again start writing your choices: wife, girlfriend, someone else. Points to girlfriend, shows photo, and if the photo is something that they already have in their wallet or some other place, that's great to know. Oh, that's her in the photo. She looks like a very nice person. Here's the thing about written choices. You've got to know some things about the person if you're going to be this specific. So I would already kind of need to know that. You get some of this information from the file. You get it from other kinds of assessment questions that you might ask previously. But I try to do an exchange like this if I've never actually had this conversation before. Otherwise, it seems like a test. So even though I may know the answer to this from my interactions with the file, I haven't personally interacted with the person with aphasia about this topic before, so I'm not testing them. So again, we can go back to the whiteboard and use this as a way of providing written choices as we go along. So I could even do this. You can think about, switch over here. And we'll go back to our whiteboard. And so I might do this and say, how do you like to learn about AAC? Do you like to have demonstrations? Do you like to have hands-on practice? Or do you like to take quizzes to learn about it? And then I can ask, and then you might select from among these. And maybe you select by drawing lines through things that you like or that you don't like. And then maybe you choose to circle the thing that works out really well for you. Oh, okay, so I see that you really like hands-on learning. That's important for me to know. All right. In a graphic scale, I may say, oh, how do you like your house now, where you're living currently? And the person can give me I might need to tell them 1 is not at all good and 10 is super great, awesome. Right? And then the person can indicate on there how they feel about a range of different choices. How do you feel about this person? How did you feel about that event, that trip, that interaction? How did it go? You can get an estimation of it using a graphic scale. If you look down along the side here, you'll see that rating scales is, oops, I'm using the wrong. Rating scales is an option. And so I've got different buttons here that I might use, and I can click on that and get my rating scale. Maybe I use a different one. Here's a pain scale that I might want to use. Tagged yes, no questions are going to be especially good for people who are emerging communicators, and I think it's important to be really careful about how you use these because they can come off as quite patronizing if you're not skillful in how you ask. Did you ever serve in the military? And this is where you have sort of no response from someone. Again, these emerging communicators who are struggling with attention, who are struggling with keeping track of everything that's going on, and I can give clear cues. Did you ever serve in the military? Yes or no? Do you like cupcakes? No response. Do you like cupcakes? Yes or no? And this is a pretty simple way to tag on there. One of the other reasons, though, that this gets suggested as a partner strategy is it helps limit people from chaining a whole bunch of questions together. It gets them to stop and just signal the clear response that they're looking for. Because otherwise, did you ever serve in the military? Did you serve? Remember? Are you sure? Wasn't in the Navy? Remember? Is that something that you're thinking about? Remember the times that you were in Florida? We get all these questions chained together and we don't get a good sense of this person's ability to respond to a single question, and they're also getting confused in terms of which question are they supposed to answer. Finding the right high-tech strategy. Remember, communication's multimodal. So even though we're talking about high-tech strategies, even though I'm showing examples of Aphasia Page Set, we're still going to have gestures. We're still going to have speech. We're still going to have drawings that are going to be important. When you do try out devices, you want to role play them in meaningful situations. You've got those meaningful situations by doing your needs assessment, so you know the topics that are important to this person. And then you want to make sure you have appropriate vocabulary. Some of those I may generate just with my augmented input and written choices, and I get signals back from somebody about the kind of things that are important, and then I can go follow up and make sure vocabulary is available. When you do role plays, be sure you have a meaningful situation. Again, I can't stress this enough, to just try to invent fictional scenarios that people don't connect with is really challenging. Also, when you work with adults especially, taking a very problem-focused approach to your treatment is important. It helps you to convey, hey, I recognize there are things that are tough for you right now, and let's get in there and deal with them, as opposed to, hey, let's work on some things so that somehow the things that are challenging for you are just going to get better. That's difficult for somebody who's looking at rehabilitation and wants to address and get at those situations. So here's some very practical things. You're hosting your granddaughter's engagement dinner. You need to buy coffee. You need to plan a trip. I mean, these are all practical situations that you can start to say, well, let's think about what exactly needs to be said to be successful in these situations. And there are different ways that you can go about tackling these things. You can have a quick couple of quick stored messages. You can have a person go through the scripts for conversation. Saying hello is in one place, getting some small talks in another place, or you can say, I think there's a pretty specific script here. Let's go through and practice it, and then let's also talk about how to deal with some unanticipated things. So once again, we can go back over to our pages. One of the things about the word list here is we have some different categories, and we may find something that we're particularly ready for in terms of a need situation. On the other hand, maybe you need to look at some very specific topics. And so in these cases, these are topics for communication that we want to hit, and you may say, okay, I know that shopping is an area here. And so I've got some phrases that are here that I may need, but these are my ideas about, well, I think these phrases could be helpful for you. But you may want to tackle this as more of a script. And here's the script we go through to do this. And then you got to make decisions about, do I really need this phrase, and do I need it now, and how do we practice doing this? That might be a way that you tackle it. You may say, you know what, let's go through just some of the words that are unique to the store that we may be going to, because this is a pretty general list here. Or we may go through and practice some of these phrases. So that's one place, shopping, that's important. We may have something else for medical needs. We go this way. And once again, we've got some phrases that are helpful, but we've also got a script. And this is maybe an analysis of what typically happens at a medical visit. And those are things you want to practice, and then you see when something unforeseen happens, is it a phrase that's here, or is this a word that we need to have in this section that's going to be really helpful? So these topics can be really quite helpful in practicing for your role plays. What's the kind of data that you need to track here? Well, you could look at, well, how many turns were successful? How many times did this person initiate? Initiations are really key for figuring out, is somebody still partner dependent, or are they partner independent? Were they able to use other modes of communication? Were they independent with their high-tech system in terms of getting to the topic that they needed, moving back and forth to scripts and other words? How many breakdowns were there, and how did they do with the operational skills of this system? We can also think about things a little more generally and say, well, how do conversations work on a regular basis? On the previous slide, in role plays, we were talking about very specific situations and specific vocabulary we might anticipate for that situation. We also have a number of just social interactions that, particularly for adults, are important. They're a reality of how adults relate to each other. And when you look at conversations with adults, you say they actually have a pretty predictable structure. You have greetings, you have some small talk, and it may end there. That may be it, right? You may not even get to small talk. You may just have a greeting. And then you move on to, though, if the person's still there, then you can move on to either it's a storytelling, some kind of public speaking situation, maybe it's a procedural description where I'm going to tell you how to do something, or something else that's content specific, so related to a particular topic, and then they're all going to end up with some kind of wrap up and saying goodbye. And each time you got to think about, well, is this going to continue or not? So let's take a look at some of these. Your greetings can be very generic or very specific, right? How you say hello to an unfamiliar person versus how you say hello to a longtime friend, those may be different. There are differences in how older people versus younger people might say hello or greet each other. And then there's going to be variation with different cultures. So once again, we can go over to the Aphasia Page Set, take a look. And here, we're going to look at quickfires. Quickfires. And under quickfires, that's where you see your greetings and socials. So some of these things that really start out this way, right? And I've got some real basic stuff of yes, no, hello. Remember, people generally, if they've got some unaided means to say hello, that might be good enough for
hello.
them. On the other hand, if the person isn't seeing them very well, and what they're doing, they may
hello.
want to say that out loud, and we can do that. Some of these situations, some of the things that may follow, so if you're going to go past hello, because sometimes you just say hello and you move on, but you could
What's
just
new?
ask things like, what's new, right? Or it's good to see you, right? You may ask, how are you?
How are you?
And in a lot of adult conversations, most people would just say, oh, I'm good, how are you? And then you'd say good, and then that's how you move on, right? And in other cases, you can ask somebody, how are you? And they'll tell you quite a bit. They'll jump to that next step of something very specific about what's going on in their lives. And you may have thought, oh, I thought we weren't really going to do that. We were just going to continue on. Notice that in quickfires, the words don't go up into the message window. They're just quickly to be said, and that's it. You don't have to deal with this. So a lot of times, though, I can anticipate
How are you?
if I ask somebody, how are you? They may ask, how are you doing? And I can see, well, do I have that here? I don't have a great one, so maybe I'll go to my feelings and say, well, where's just like my neutral thing of like, I'm good, or I'm doing okay, or I'm hanging in there. I may not have that, and so that's something I identify, and I put it in one of these other blocks, or maybe I put it in my feelings. And if there's something that's really breaking down, we can go to a repair, and the person can
What I
learn
want to say isn't here.
What I really want to say isn't here. Or now the person with aphasia can prompt, hey, ask me some yes or no questions, or give me some choices. Tell me that again, because I think that's going to be helpful for me in this conversation. Okay, so we've got some greetings, we've got some basic feelings, and then there are ways we can talk about what do you do if this doesn't work out so well. And so that's a place where we can start with some basic greetings. In small talk, it's really your next step. I mentioned this before. You can say, how's it going? How are you? What's happening? What's new? How was your weekend? You can also get into, if you wanted to, part of small talk also could be in your topics, because you may want to talk about the weather, which I would put in a small talk situation too.
What is the weather supposed to be like today?
All right. And we may have a basic script to talk about the weather. Or we can go with some basic weather words, the weather's a pretty safe topic. So whether it's part of small talk or whether it's something you're getting into a little bit more, you've got those options here. But the weather is an important part of people's day. I can see, well, are there any other topics that are maybe part of some small talk? Well, you could see. Or maybe you need to have one that goes right in here. But a lot of things in the topics grid are really part of your next set of conversations. So when we move past some basic small talk, we're going to get into more specific kinds of examples. So generic small talk are some of those very general kinds of things where you're not really expecting details. Specific ones, this is something I might really prepare for, have some topics ready for going right down in here, my topic 1, my topic 2. I may want to have those ready for when I talk with a friend. On the other hand, specific kinds of talk may come up in our visual scene menu where I have certain people that I really think about interacting with, and maybe we always go out and go for walks together, and so I'm going to use a scene like this where I've got much more specific kinds of conversation. And since
I like to watch the birds.
That might be something that we do. For storytelling, this is another spot where you may really want to use some of these visual scenes again. And so we can come back. Remember, you've got some visual scenes. You've also got different topics that you can use. And those things frequently have different scripts associated with them. But a lot of times your stories are going to evolve out of something really specific related to a photo or something that you may want to share. Stories go along really well with that. And so it may be something about your family, for example. And that might be where you put that script. You can also have things like procedural descriptions, so how to process or do a procedure. These could be directions, recipes, but they could also be instructions for a personal care attendant or something related to medical care. And we saw these come up in our topics on how you might direct that kind of situation.
I want to make an appointment.
And we can move down the list. Content-specific conversations, these are going to be more unique. These are things you're going to have to add in as new topics. And they're going to be different social roles that a person has and fulfills. You want to wrap up conversations, some kind of signal to the end, have things where you go back into your quick fire, say it was nice talking to you, see you again, see you later, those kinds of things. I want to talk about some different examples here. So for contextual choice communicators, you're going to be working with contextual requests. Remember, the person can have difficulty understanding topics that are really outside of the present or that aren't personalized. That's why they are contextual choice. You need to offer them choices within that specific context space, something that's very familiar, something that's highly personal relevant. This is where that person lives and is tied to. They have a lot of trouble with things that are very displaced and talking about things that aren't immediately right there in front of them or right there as an issue. Contextual choice communicators aren't going to do super well with lots of hypothetical kinds of situations. You have a lot of trouble saying, now, when you go to X place, what kinds of things do you think you might need to talk about? That's not going to be helpful for your contextual choice communicator. You want to work with their partners to be sure that they're giving them choices in the moment. You want to be sure your contextual choice communicator has access to lots of photos and pictures for their information so that they can get that kind of context along with them. Very simple family stories, basic memory book kinds of things, and then cues for the partner. Please ask me yes or no questions. Please write down the things that you're saying. And that's where you are with contextual choice communicator. For people who are transitional, this is where you want to start thinking about those scripts and practicing them. You can tell very simple stories by going through. The Aphasia Page Set has a script that you can use to tell a story, and basically you just go from top to bottom to do it. Like, people who are transitional communicators can answer very predictable questions. They may need to get that kind of prompting to go on. And we want to get them to be more independent in how they're using something.
I'm in pain.
A stored message communicator is somebody who can participate in thinking about some of those hypotheticals and in getting situations set up for them. They can practice. They do great with role plays. Now this situation's coming up. Let's practice how you're going to deal with it. To a certain extent, transitional communicators can do this too, but they're probably going to need more prompting in the moment. Your stored message communicator is going to practice and be ready to do it independently. Your generative communicator is somebody who can establish topics, and this is something you may want to discuss as a strategy. Hey, give people some clues about where you're headed, and they're going to better be able to help you to co-construct a situation, particularly if you get into a little trouble with some of your typing or word prediction. But this person's going to be shifting back and forth between stored messages and then some typing. So this is not people who only use stored messages, who only have utterance-based communication. These are for people who can start to generate some new things on their own through writing and drawing too. And a specific need communicator is a person who identifies a particular task where they're really struggling and you need to problem solve around that task. Word prediction is really important to think about for people who are literate. And just because someone isn't an independent speller, though, remember that prediction may be something they can get. If they've got decent first letter spelling abilities, maybe they'll be able to use that. So we can go into our keyboard here on the Aphasia Page Set, because we've actually got a nice keyboard that we can use. And notice that as I
Capital T.
type, it's actually set to
Y.
be giving me things here.
Type.
Okay. I selected my word, so it's automatically going to fill in spaces
Is.
for me.
H. A.
Oh, there's the word.
Hard.
If the person wants
Type
to
is
convey
hard.
that typing is hard, for example, they may be able to use that. And so I've got my prediction window ahead. The prediction window's got some symbol support in addition to the word I may be trying to spell, and I can clear that out when I'm done. So I talked about visual scenes before, and if you're making these in a low-tech way, it's important to remember that these aren't exactly the kinds of things that you're thinking about. If you're constructing photos that you want to have support around, or even if you're doing this in a high-tech way, these aren't the same as the visual scenes you use with children in Snapseed. Here you focus really on one main image at a time and build some communication around that. And you use text, voice output, question buttons, some highlighting, some drawing, other kinds of color coding to indicate this is a question, this is a statement you may want to make, this is a follow-up. You let partners co-construct to get the gist of important life events or experience. And this helps to bypass the reliance on telling an extended story with syntax by just having that there and allowing you to socially participate more. So in this sample, we've got our main picture. These are ways you might navigate around it. Again, if I were setting this up as a communication book, I might use these other photos as ways to talk about these are the other visual scenes that I have available. Each scene has a central photo, it has some statements about it, and then it has a question, and that question is color-coded in blue. And so this is in the original visual scene setup, this is how we had them. If you head over to our pages and we look at visual scenes, in this case, you see some real similarities. We have a central photo. We have some things we may want to talk about.
I have children.
But we're going to need to get some more of these specifics in here. Who are the children? The nice thing you can do, though, is remember you can edit these buttons and you can add photos in here. And that may be something that you want to do, is to go in and specifically work with buttons within this context. On the other hand, you may just want to go and say, you know, I think I'd rather work more with just a photo album. And so we go back into our dashboard here, and I can actually have different photo albums that I put together. And maybe that's more of the approach I'd like to take with talking about family members. And then I might have one specifically that refers to family. So you can think about a template of something like this. And again, if you're doing something in a low-tech way, the idea is to think about your central photo, the other photos you want to build things around, you want to have access to a keyboard, you want to have basic statements and maybe a question or more. In the old page set, we use this in a high-tech way to navigate around, but now the new SnapCore pages are set up a little bit differently, so you still see something like this in Compass, for example. What are the challenges in aphasia intervention? Well, not everyone with aphasia regains the skills needed to become a functional speaker, and so we want to try to figure out what skills are preserved and how we can capitalize on those, because we still got visual spatial processing to work with. We have knowledge of life experiences in the world that we can build on, and that's one of the things we do with contextually rich visual images. We want to represent the meaning in a photo, support people's navigation, whether they're using the visual scenes or the photo albums that I talked about in the page set there, get a shared communication space, and have ways to launch to other photos, launch to a whiteboard, launch to a script where you can tell a story, be able to draw, do other things, and allow for these integrations to happen. But you need good photos to launch this. These and contextually rich images have a couple of very important requirements. They have to represent situations, places, or experiences, and they have to depict people or objects in relation to each other, natural environment, and the central action of a scene. So you have to have people in these photos. And if you think about your own photos, if you look through your camera roll right now and say, what kind of pictures do I have? The ones that you really hold on to, like, enjoy, they're the ones that have people in them usually. The picture itself tells a story. I remember the first time that I went to Europe, I wanted to take lots of pictures, and I would take pictures of scenes. So I was in Portugal, and there was the coast there, and I thought it was really beautiful, and I took all these pictures of the coast. But those pictures don't have a ton of meaning for me right now, much later on. One, your little square can't capture really the beauty of that particular moment, even though that was probably my desire at the time. But the pictures that I really hold on to are the ones that had people in them. It's the people that I really want to remember, or what happened during the time we were at the coast there. So, what are your criteria for evaluating good contextually rich images? They have to have 4 important things. They have to have a context. So setting, they have to have people, objects, and activities there. It's got to be some kind of story that's being told. There has to be an interaction between the people or with the people in the environment. It has to be personally relevant. It can't be somebody else's story. It has to be their story. And there has to be clarity regarding key elements in this picture. So how can I figure out what was going on in this photo based on some kind of uniform, position, places where people are relative to each other, and implied action, what's happening? In low-tech systems, I may want to have phrases that are directly here. And then I may say, please ask me about something else. So here's a photo. That actually happens to be David Buchelman. And it's obviously a wedding anniversary, right? Here's a huge cake. They're together, and they're celebrating. And so you're going to have statements there, and then a question that say, hey, ask me about this so we can talk about it some more. You can also use visual scene displays for restorative interventions. So here you actually are trying to work on something, and you're trying to rebuild connections. If you're looking at linguistic competence, if you're looking at how do I build this person's natural speech, we can use a contextually rich photo to go through and repetitively practice retrieval of words, phrases, based on a photo here. Or I can use my photo to support communication with somebody else. So remember to get those contextually rich photos. You want themes that are based on autobiographical episodes. You don't just want individual great photos, but you want to have movement through lots of different scenes. You want to have signature photographs that help mark this is about family. Another signature photograph on your light tech system that says this is about my hobbies, this is about my travels. How do you start? You figure out where they're currently going, or you look through historically relevant events and ideas. And one of the things I find is that now my own photos are curated for me. When I go into my own photos here, I can see that when I look at this, things are going to be set up for me by way of dates. I can go and look at different people, and it'll tell me the people that are really important, or it'll say, hey, this person, who happens to be my boss, comes in a lot. Here's the dean of the college, and so I have a lot of photos of these people or past students, but they're not named necessarily. They're just like, hey, this person shows up a lot. And here they are at professional organizations, and then here's people that I work with, and then there are people in my family that I would want to talk about. But it's already saying, hey, we find these people a lot, and in some cases you already told us who they are, so if I want to find pictures of somebody, I can just do that. And so they're already going to be organized for me, and this happens already here, but there are a number of places that do that. So something that's really helpful. You can embed your AAC work into traditional therapies. that may be more restorative in nature. You can start really slowly with just a single page that you're going to build with a person, and then come up with your whole discussions around key photos for people. Think about the kind of key photos that you really want to build things around, and you know these from your needs assessment to know what areas are really pretty important for this person. You want to think about how are you going to prompt your partner on the photos. Are you going to say things like, ask me about this? Are you going to give the partner clues on how to assemble, and when they add new photos, just give them some guidance on, hey, here's how we'd like to set up the system. And then think about, now maybe here are ways you can add new things so that it has some consistency to it. You can do this in very general, low-tech ways too. I have sort of signature photos here. This is wife, and it's a little hard to read, but I would grab onto this tab, and then I could flip to that page, and it would have photos in there. And here's ones of family. I would grab onto that tab, flip the pages, and it would come in there. We can go here on more of a visual scene. This is places in the house, some clues on where to look for different things. Here's another one where I have these scripts and then a question at the end. And if we tie this back to the casebook, remember Tim is our person with aphasia that we started talking about at the very beginning of the course. And he's 59, he has broke his aphasia, he lives at home with his wife. His wife's busy during a lot of the day. He worked previously as a videographer, and it turns out he's still got a real artistic side to him, and a lot of his drawings skills are preserved in some way. And he had a stroke about 2 years ago. And we already have a sense of what his communication needs are, and so we can start to think about, when I go, maybe if I'm using that aphasia page set, I say, hey, these are places I really want to consider in my topics, or these are things I really want to think about in my social interactions. I want to be sure we're talking about quick fires versus other kinds of planned conversation. Hey, I want to be sure that we've got clear ways to ask for assistance and deal with medical staff. So be thinking about that related to the other pages. He needs to engage with his wife and kids in conversation, talk about the things he did prior to his stroke, and interact with lots of different people around. He has apraxia of speech, so a lot of people with his type of aphasia also struggle with initiation, starts and restarts in his speech. He's got a lot of single word communication. So this greatly impacts his expressive language. Receptively, he's got difficulty with sequential commands. He's also got problems dealing exclusively with written text, so we know that's a limitation. But visual cues really actually help support his comprehension, particularly if you've got some drawing or other kind of things that supplement writing. Some writing still is helpful, a lot more helpful than auditory alone. So he benefits from personal pictures. He can draw some, but his spelling's really limited to around 3 letters. After that, he really starts to break down. So we really want to look into how much can he benefit from some prediction. He used some icons, generated single words, but we knew that writing alone wasn't going to be a channel. Tim's not going to be a generative communicator as he just types out all of his own messages. But he certainly has more than just specific needs communicator. He's not doing great except for this one time. He's having pretty global struggles. He relies on gestures, drawing, and writing. We want to look at a multimodal approach for him that includes some restoration of his speech, some work on his speech. So they had a sentence production program for people with aphasia, and there are a number of published programs out there that can work on retrieval, so I'm not going to get into these in the course of this class. Uses AAC to focus on utterance-based communication, so messages that are stored as complete wholes. He uses low-tech compensatory strategies when people have trouble figuring out his message, we want to expand the kinds of things he can say through high-tech means and give partners some good strategies to assist him. So Tim is a transitional communicator. He doesn't have a lot of AAC experience, so he's not going to come in and just independently start using an AAC system, but he's got some places to build on. Tim can do more than just communicate within a context. He's able to deal with things that are beyond the here and now. Still likes the personal relevancy, but he can speculate and talk about things that are going to happen. He just needs more skills to build up to being more of an independent communicator so he can do things on his own. So he's going to start out transitional, but we certainly got hopes that Tim's really going to be that stored message independent communicator.